The last breath smoke covered the dead land as fire spread across the broken field, and the sky above was red and angry with dust and silent machines falling from the battle. Daniel moved with a limp through metal parts and ruined bodies, his bio mask cracked on one side and every breath harder than the last. He did not know where his unit went or if anyone was still alive. The comms were silent, and the only sound left was the wind screaming through the ruins and the sharp hum of power leaking from crushed alien armor. He stopped and fell to one knee, feeling the weight of his injuries. He pressed a hand against his ribs and felt blood, but he kept moving, crawling, now dragging one leg behind him like dead weight. Then he saw her. She was lying between two broken alien ships, her silver armor cracked across the chest, her skin pale blue, and her face marked with deep lines of her kind. She was different from the others, smaller, younger, maybe, and her eyes were closed, her breath shallow and weak. She was dying. Daniel paused, breathing hard. He looked around. No one was there. No cameras, no leaders, no orders. Just him and this dying alien who should be his enemy. He stepped closer with care, every move slow, every sound loud in the quiet. He stood over her and looked at her face, her chest rising slow and soft, and then stopping again for seconds. People could not breathe the air on this planet. It burned them from the inside. Their lungs broke within minutes. He had seen it before. Daniel looked at his mask. It was the only thing keeping him alive, and hers was broken next to her hand, crushed by falling metal. He knelt beside her, placed two fingers on her neck. The pulse was weak, but there it was. She would die in minutes. Daniel pulled back and sat on the ground for a moment, the pain in his side getting worse, the air already feeling heavy. Even with the mask, he looked at the sky and whispered something no one would hear, not even himself. Then he made a choice. He leaned over and placed his mask gently over her face, sealing it with shaking hands. He pressed the button, and the soft hiss of clean air started filling her lungs again. Her body twitched once, then again, and slowly her chest began to rise with life. Daniel coughed hard, falling to the ground beside her. Without the mask, the air burned his throat like fire, his eyes watering, his chest heavy like stone. He curled up and held his ribs. Every second felt longer than the last, but he kept watching her face through the mask, her eyes still closed, but her color returning, her body moving more with each breath. He smiled through the pain and closed his eyes for a moment, just to rest. Then he heard a sound. It was soft, but clear, a gasp, a sharp inhale, then a voice. Not in words, but something between a breath and a whisper. He opened his eyes and saw her looking at him, her eyes wide and bright and full of something he had never seen in one of their kind before. Not fear, not hate, shock. She looked at him, the mask still on her face, his blood on the ground, and her fingers slowly reaching toward him. He tried to speak but only coughed again, his body shaking from cold and pain. She moved slowly, sitting up, her arms weak, and her eyes never leaving his face. Touched the mask, then looked at her own hand as if not sure it was real. He smiled again through cracked lips and gave a small nod as if to say, "It is okay. I know what I did, and I do not regret it." She reached forward, then stopped, her hand shaking above his face as if torn between two worlds, the one that taught her to hate and the one that just watched a stranger save her life. Wind howled again, but this time it felt quiet, like the world itself had paused to watch this moment. Daniel's breaths grew slower, each one harder than the last, but still he watched her eyes. He saw something change there, something break and rebuild at the same time. Tears slid down her cheek, and she did not understand why, because her kind did not cry, but there it was, warm and strange and heavy, like something deep inside her had woken up. He lifted his hand weakly and touched hers, and she did not pull away. He gave her the last of his air, and in that moment nothing else in the galaxy mattered. Not the war, not the past, not the orders, just a human and an alien breathing the same life together, the unthinkable. Choisiari sat still with the mask on her face, air filling her lungs with every slow breath. She looked at the human lying beside her, his chest moving like a broken wave, small and weak and fading. Her body was shaking, not from fear, but from something she could not name. Her training told her to leave him. He was the enemy, and the mission was always greater than the moment, but the mission Never told her what to do if the enemy saved her life. She looked around the battlefield, broken metal, red skies, smoke dancing like ghosts, and silence too deep for comfort. No one came, no signal, no rescue, just ruin, and one human giving his breath away. She pulled the mask from her face and tried to put it back on his mouth, but he turned his head weakly and gave a small gesture, his hand lifting, just enough to say no. He wanted her to live. Why would a human do this? She stood slowly, her legs trembling but her strength returning. She needed to decide now. She could walk away, try to find her people, try to escape and let him die in peace, or she could do what made no sense and help him in return. Ares stepped back and found something shining near the wreckage of a small shuttle. She moved closer and saw a backup oxygen unit, bent but not crushed. She pulled it out and connected it to a cracked mask hanging on the edge of a seat. It hissed weakly, the flow unstable, but it was something. She brought it back to the human, whose name she still did not know. She placed it over his mouth, adjusted the seal, and pressed the button. The light blinked red, but a slow trickle of air began to flow. He gasped once, then again, and his hand twitched, his fingers closing around hers by accident, or maybe not. Ari pulled back. Her breath caught in her throat. She was not ready for this. She had seen war since she was a child, watched her people fall to human fire, heard her leaders say that mercy was a weakness, an emotion, a disease. But what she saw now was something no one ever told her about. She dragged the human's body over the broken ground toward the edge of the field, every inch a struggle, every noise making her freeze in fear that something would rise from the smoke and kill them both. But nothing came, no sound but her breath and the slow whisper of his life hanging by threads as the sun dipped lower and the light turned gold. She reached a place where the hills began to rise and the ruins gave way to shattered stone and dead trees. There was a narrow path between the rocks, and she followed it, dragging him behind her. With slow steps and shaking arms, hours passed, or maybe only minutes. She could not tell time anymore. Only the weight of what she carried, not just his body, but something heavier, guilt, wonder, and a question that would not leave her mind. Who was he? Why did he choose to die for her? She found a hollow space under an old structure, broken and bent, but standing. She laid him down gently and checked the mask. The air was still coming, weak but steady. His eyes moved behind closed lids, and his lips murmured something she could not understand. She leaned closer and listened. A name. He whispered a name over and over. Leah. She did not know who Leah was, but the way he said it made her heart twist, like it was someone he loved, someone he would never see again. She sat beside him and looked up at the stars that started to appear one by one, cold and far and silent. She remembered the stories her people told about humans, stories filled with fear and rage and warnings. They never told this story. They never spoke of a man who would give his last breath to an enemy. She reached into her belt and pulled out a small device, cracked but still blinking, a come link to her command. She could call them now, tell them she was alive, and wait for pickup. But if they came, they would find the human and they would kill him. Without question, her hand hovered over the button. Her breath caught again. This was the unthinkable choice. Could live and return and forget, or she could change everything. Her fingers moved away from the button, and instead, she pulled a small tracker from her pocket, placed it on a nearby rock just in case, and then turned back to him. He needed more help than she could give. Here was a place she remembered, not far from this zone, an old outpost, neutral and abandoned before the war began. Maybe there were supplies, maybe shelter, maybe hope. She took his hand and gripped it tight, as if that small touch would pass courage into her soul. Then she whispered, "Hold on, please, hold on." And with everything she had left, she lifted him once more and began the slow, painful walk toward the unknown, not because she had to, but because someone gave her a breath, and in that breath something inside her had changed forever. The long crawl, the ground was hard and cruel beneath her feet. Sharp stones tore at her boots, and every step felt heavier than the last. Ari dragged the human slowly, his body limp and cold, his breaths uneven behind the cracked mask. She kept checking the oxygen flow, but it was running low again. The hiss turning softer with every mile. Her arms burned from pulling his Weight her back ached from bending, and the silence around her made every noise louder, every broken twig, every gust of wind felt like a warning, like something was watching from the shadows. They moved through a narrow pass between two cliffs, dark and full of ash fallen from the sky. The war had turned this place into a graveyard for both sides, and Ari could feel the sorrow in the ground under her boots, like the dead were watching her from below. But she kept going, because he saved her, because she could not forget the way his hand touched hers when he gave her the mask, not as an enemy, not as a soldier, but as someone who saw her as worth saving. She remembered his voice, weak and cracked, whispering that name again and again. Leah. It stayed in her mind like a flame burning through doubt and fear. She stopped near a broken wall covered in vines and dust. The old outpost was close now. She could see its shape beyond the ridge, a low structure with a slanted roof built before the war, when humans and her kind still shared ideas before politics turned peace into fire. She pulled the human under the wall into the shadow and rested her head against the stone, her breath short, her hands shaking. She looked down at him, his lips dry, his skin pale, but his chest still rising, still holding Ona. Sudden sound made her jump, metal clicking against rock. She pulled out her small blade and held it close, her eyes scanning the path above. Then she saw it, a wild creature, long and thin, with black skin and glowing eyes crawling across the ledge, its sharp teeth flashing in the dim light. It had smelled them. It dropped from the cliff and landed with a thud, its legs bent and ready to spring toward them. Ari stood fast, her heart pounding, her feet planted between the beast and the human behind her. The creature lunged. She dodged to the side and slashed with the blade, cutting across its leg. It screamed and spun back, its claws grazing her shoulder. She felt the burn, but stayed on her feet. Another strike, this time to its neck, and the beast fell twitching and growling before going still. Ari dropped to one knee, clutching her arm, blood seeping through her suit. But she turned back to the human and checked the mask again. It was cracked now from the fight, the air hiss, weaker than ever. No time left. She pulled him up once more, ignoring the pain in her shoulder, and dragged him toward the outpost. The gates, long broken, the doors hanging from twisted hinges inside. It was dark and cold, old walls covered in dust and vines, machines dead from years of silence. But in one corner a console still blinked, faint green light flickering like a dying star. She laid the human on a flat surface and moved to the console, her fingers flying across the keys in her own language, bypassing locks and rerouting power. The system groaned back to life. Lights flickered above, revealing the space around them, a med bed broken, a water tank dry, but there was a supply box still sealed. She opened it and found a pack of oxygen cells, old but still functional. She attached one to the mask and watched as the red light turned yellow, then green. The air flow stable again. The human stirred his fingers, moving his mouth, opening slightly. She leaned close, his eyes opened just a little, and he looked at her with confusion. Then a soft smile touched his lips. He whispered again, Leia. Then he looked at her and said, "One more thing, you're not her." She shook her head gently and whispered no, but him still hear. His eyes drifted shut again, but this time not from fading, more like sleep, like true. Starry sat beside him and reached into a drawer, finding bandages and a scanner. She checked his wounds, broken ribs, internal bleeding, low pressure, but he was alive and stable for now. As she worked, she thought of everything she had been taught, the lies, the fear, the hate, and how none of it matched this moment. She saw a photo fall from his suit pocket. A small girl with bright eyes holding a paper star, her smile wide, her hair tied in messy lines. Leia, his daughter, Mayberry, held the photo and stared at it, her fingers tracing the lines of the paper star, and her mind full of questions. Who was she before the war? What had she become, and what would she do now? She looked at the man lying there, breathing because of her, alive because of him. They had nothing in common, and yet everything that mattered. And outside the walls of the outpost, the world waited, ready to crush them both. But for now, in this small place of quiet, they were not enemies. They were survivors, truth in blood. Air inside the old outpost was cold and stale. Ari sat beside the human, whose name she now learned was Daniel. His breathing was shallow but steady, The oxygen mask hissed quietly as it helped him breathe. Ari looked at the console again. It was old, but still worked. She connected a small data cable from her belt and started searching for information, anything that could help them survive. The screen flickered as files loaded. Slowly the truth came out. Ari's eyes widened. She found hidden records about the war, the lies her leaders told. Her people believed humans were cruel monsters, but the data showed something different. Years ago, humans had saved Ari's ancestors from extinction. They gave them medicine, food, and shelter when no one else would. But this story was erased from history, hidden away to keep the war alive. Ari leaned back and closed her eyes. She felt anger and sadness mixed inside her. The war was built on lies and hate, not on truth. Daniel coughed and opened his eyes weakly. He looked at Ari with confusion and pain. "You found something," he whispered, barely loud enough to hear. "Yes," Ari said softly. "Your people saved mine long ago, but no one told us." Daniel tried to smile, but it hurt. He looked at the mask and then at her. "I never wanted this war. I only wanted to protect my home and my daughter Leah." Ari nodded, understanding the pain in his voice. "My people were taught to hate. Humans were enemies, but you showed me kindness." She stood up and checked the medbed in the corner. The machines were old, but she hoped to use them to help Daniel heal. His body was weak from wounds and lack of oxygen. She needed to act fast. She opened a medical kit and pulled out a syringe filled with a strange blue liquid. Her people used it to heal injuries faster, but it was risky for humans. She had never done this before. Daniel looked at her with tired eyes. "Do it," he said. "I trust you." Ari cleaned his arm and injected the serum carefully. She watched his body as the liquid spread through his veins. Slowly his breathing became stronger. His skin warmed a little and color returned to his face. She smiled for the first time since they met. But then Daniel's eyes opened wide. He gasped suddenly and grabbed her hand tightly. "Thank you," he said with real feeling. "You saved me." Ari squeezed his hand back. "We saved each other." Suddenly an alarm blared through the outpost. Loud and urgent red lights flashed on the walls. Ari jumped up, her heart pounding. She looked at Daniel. "They are coming." She grabbed the small weapon from the table and held it close. Outside she could hear engines and voices. Human and alien ships closing in on the outpost. They wanted to take Daniel back or kill him before the truth spread. Ari looked into his eyes. "We have to get the truth out." Daniel nodded slowly, struggling to sit up together. They moved to the console again. Ari typed quickly, sending a message across the galaxy. A message of truth. A message of hope. She used the old beacon to send data to both human and alien commanders. Proof of kindness and lies. Her fingers trembled as she worked, but she did not stop. Daniel looked at her and said, "No matter what happens, I am glad you were here." The doors burst open and soldiers entered, some human, some alien, all armed, ready to fight. Ari stepped in front of Daniel. "Stop," she shouted, her voice strong. "Listen to this message." The soldiers paused, confused but curious. The beacon continued to send the story of a soldier who gave his last breath to save an enemy. A story of an alien who chose compassion over hate. Some soldiers lowered their weapons. Others kept watch, but the mood shifted. Then gunfire broke the silence. A stray bullet hit the wall near Daniel. Ari pushed him behind her, using her body as a shield. She fired back, protecting him. Reinforcements arrived from both sides, some shouting orders, others holding peace signs. The battlefield was no longer just outside. It was inside hearts and minds. Daniel and Ari were lifted from the ground together. The war was not over, but something had changed. The war of lies was ending. The war of truth was beginning. A new war, or a new beginning. The outpost was filled with noise now. Voices shouting orders and questions, mixed with sounds of boots on metal floors. Daniel and Ari lay side by side, both tired but alive. Outside the sky was darkening. Ships from both sides hovered like vultures, waiting for a signal to attack or retreat. But something had changed. Message they sent was spreading fast. Not just words. But proof videos record stories of the past, showing kindness where there was supposed to be hate. Leaders from both humans and aliens watched the broadcast in shock. Some angered, some confused, but many unable to ignore the truth. Ari sat beside Daniel in the small room, her shoulder still aching from the fight, but her heart lighter than before. She looked at him with new respect and something like hope. Daniel smiled weakly. "I never thought an alien would save my life," he said, "and now I see the war was never about us. It was about power and fear." Ari nodded. "We were pawns in a game we did not understand, but now the game is changing." Suddenly the doors opened again. This time a group of humans and aliens entered, not soldiers but leaders, the commanders of the fleets. They came with cautious steps and hard eyes, but when they saw Daniel and Ari alive and together, their faces changed. One human commander spoke. "This is unexpected. We were told no one would survive this battle." An alien leader added, "Your presence here challenges everything we believed." Ari stood and faced them. "The war is built on lies. The truth must come out before more lives are lost." Daniel found strength in their presence and said, "It started with a breath, a shared breath that saved me, and it can save us all." The leaders talked for hours, plans made for peace talks and investigations, promises to uncover the hidden truths and end the war of hate. Outside the outpost, the soldiers lowered their weapons. A silence fell, like a calm before a new storm, but this time it felt different. It felt like a chance. Days later, in a neutral zone, Daniel and Ari stood before a crowd of humans and aliens, their story told in words and images, a symbol of hope. The little girl in the photo, Leah, was mentioned often, a reminder of what was lost and what could be found again. Ari looked at Daniel and smiled. "We changed the galaxy with one breath, but the real change is just beginning." Daniel held her hand firmly. "We will make sure no one forgets this moment. No one forgets the power of kindness." And so a new chapter began, a chapter not written in weapons, but in trust, not in hatred, but in understanding. Galaxy was wide and full of dangers, but also full of hope, because sometimes it takes only one breath to change everything. The end.